Book 3, Chapter 66. Individual souls mistake subjective for objective. Thus, Rama, there is one true essence, which appears as many by our mistake. This variety is caused by the production of one from another, as one lamp is lighted from another. By knowing one's self as nothing, as it was before it came into being, and by considering the falsity of his notions, no one can have any cause for grief. Man is only a being of his own conception. By getting rid of this concept, he is freed from his idea of the duality of the world, just as one wearing shoes perceives the whole earth he treads upon to be covered with skin. As the plantain tree has no pith except its manifold coats, so there is no materiality to the world other than our false conceptions of it. Our births are followed by childhood, youth, old age, and death, one after the other, and then opens the prospect of a heaven or hell to our view, like passing phantoms before the flighty mind. As the clear eye sees bubbles of light in the empty sky, so the thoughtless mind sees the sky full of luminous bodies, which are only phantoms of the brain. As one moon appears as two to the dim-sighted eye, so the intellect, corrupted by influence of the senses, sees a duality in the unity of the Supreme Spirit. As the giddiness of wine presents the pictures of trees before the drunken eye, so does the inebriation of sensation present the phantoms of the world before the excited intellect. Know the revolution of the visible world to resemble the revolving wheel of a potter's mill, which they turn about in play like the rotating ball of a terrestrial globe. When consciousness thinks of another thing as something other than itself, it falls into the error of dualism. But when it concentrates its thoughts within, it loses the sense of objective duality. We have a question. May I ask you to tell more about this? Does it mean that the Jiva creates another Jiva? For example, Yoga Vasishtha 366.1, as one lamp is lighted from another. That's an interesting question. Let's go take a look at that for a moment. Well, the chapter begins, of course, the title is pretty telling. Individual souls mistake subjective for objective. Now, as the Yoga Vasishtha moves around from one perspective to another, attempting to give us a vision of the whole. Right now, we are at the perspective of individual jivas. But we understand that in this universe, there is simultaneously billions of individual jivas, one located in and connected with every human being, 7.8 billion, plus in all the animal forms, every horse, every tiger, every elephant, every mouse has a jiva connected with us. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's a little even more complicated than that. You see, every jiva simultaneously incarnates into 12 physical bodies as it is experiencing the material world. One of those 12 could be human physiology, maybe not. The other 11 probably are various other species of the 4 million species that we can incarnate into. You could simultaneously be a mouse, a dog, an elephant, a snake, a fish, a goat, all these things. And then, of course, the mouse only lives for 6 months. And so here comes maybe another mouse body that you inhabit, and on and on and on. It gets amazingly complex, and it's fruitless to really go down that path. If we take another perspective, which is the perspective of Jivan Mukti, enlightenment in a physical body, then we realize, we know, it is our experience. There's only one jiva here, that all these animal forms and their apparent jivas are pure illusion. But from your direct question about light, one candle, one lamp is lighted from another, the jivas are not caused for more jivas in that sense, but they are in another sense. For example, there's one jiva in this universe, the creator, Brahman. But there are billions of physical life forms created by that creator. And these billions of life forms are each the host or hosted by a jiva. So in one sense, you could say that Brahma, the creator, is creating all the jivas. And that's true, because in the essential nature of jiva, jivas are not real. Jivas are illusions. You are an illusion. I am an illusion. No one is separate. No one is outside of the whole. No one exists. We think we exist. It's our experience. Oh, I exist. Philosophers say, I think, therefore I am. The philosopher thinks because he can have a thought, he exists. Or maybe he's saying, I think, therefore I am not in a sense of existing, but I am consciousness. And that is true. We are all consciousness, but we are consciousness like we are all the ocean. There is in the pure ocean, forget about the fish and all the stuff in there in this particular example. The ocean is a gigantic body of water, seemingly limitless. If you're out in the ocean swimming, you look around, you can't see anything but ocean. It's only ocean all around. And so within the ocean are many bubbles, and every bubble is made out of ocean, isn't it? Its walls are water. Inside the bubble, something different. But when the bubble pops, it ceases to be a bubble. It ceases to exist. Like that, the Jiva appears to be a bubble in consciousness. It appears to have walls made out of consciousness. But we know that these walls are actually only made out of vibrations in consciousness, which are the individual karmic traces. So in one sense, Lord Brahma, the creator of this universe, did generate all the jivas in this universe as illusory entities to inhabit all the life forms that he's creating in this universe. But in another sense, from a higher perspective, we see all the jivas are self-created. So it's not that one jiva creates another, but in the perspective of the silent witness, we can see that jivas are all self-created out of their own illusory sense of existing. In verse 3 it says, man is only a being of his own conception. So we conceive ourselves to exist, therefore we exist. The original mistake of the intellect, pragya parad, is I exist. As soon as some aspect of consciousness has the thought, and consciousness can have any kind of thought. Consciousness is aware. As soon as it acts in a way of having a thought that I exist, then spontaneously I exist. This is the nature of consciousness. It is this fertile source of everything. It is the fertile source of all illusion and all duality. And duality is just an idea of duality. I exist. Well, that's it. That's all that's necessary. As soon as consciousness has that thought, like a snowball rolling down a hill, it is completely engulfed in the illusion of existing. And very quickly, this bubble of consciousness forgets its source. And now we have the challenge of remembering. And that's the whole process of self-realization. In verse 10, when consciousness thinks of another thing as something other than itself, it falls into the error of dualism. But when it concentrates its thoughts within, it loses the sense of objective duality. So this is the perspective from the silent witness. The silent witness is pure consciousness, pure being. And when we begin meditation, we are taking the perspective of one who thinks he or she exists. And we're looking within, finding the silence that's there always in the depths of the mind. And then when we observe that silence, what's the next step? We simply become the silence. We trade places with it. It's just by intention. And as soon as we have that intention, we lose the sense of objective duality, don't we? Very suddenly, delightfully, we find ourselves as that unbounded ocean of consciousness. And there's nothing outside of us. All exists within our own consciousness. The entire universe, all universes, trillions of universes, they're all there in our own consciousness. There is nothing beside consciousness except the thoughts on which it dwells. Its sensations are all at rest as it comes to know the non-existence of objects. So the mistake of the intellect is dwelling on a thought, having a thought. A thought, it creates a boundary, a fracture in consciousness. So in one aspect, I guess you might say, of consciousness as a thought, and begins to appreciate that thought as its own thought, just like consciousness is a field of all possibilities. Now we say that very glibly and move on, but if you ponder that a moment, there's a lot there in that statement. Consciousness is the field of all possibilities. There's nothing there in that statement that says, except the one possibility that there may be a thought. No, even a thought is part of that all possibilities. So it puts things into a bit of perspective. We tend to think, because we cherish this concept of being existent, of living a life, existing, having lived many lives on and on. We cherish that concept as our thread of memories proving, yes, I exist. But who are we proving this to? We're proving it to our ego. And we know that the ego is illusion. So we have an illusion proving it's not an illusion to the illusion of itself. So when we look at it from that perspective, the whole thing seems pretty silly. Why aren't we all enlightened? Why don't we all just maintain ourselves as the one pure being and forget about all of this And that's what we intend to do. When the weak intellect is quiet by its union with the Supreme, the weak intellect, that is the intellect that has become lost in the thought on which it is dwelling. It has found itself, oh, I have a thought, I have a thought. So much is in that statement. The big mistake of the intellect there arises. But as soon as it connects with the silent witness, union with the Supreme, and by the suppression of its functions, which means it rejects as real all of the illusion that it perceives around it. It is then called quiescent or indifferent, sansanta. It is the weak intellect that thinks of external things. The weak intellect allows itself to dwell on thoughts, allows itself to focus on illusion. It's a weak intellect that does this. It's choosing illusion over reality, isn't it? And as soon as we choose illusion over reality, we become immersed in the illusion. And then we lose our connection with reality. It is the weak intellect that thinks of external things, but sound understanding ceases all thoughts. No mind, I am the self. Very interesting statement made by an enlightened person. Can't think of his name at the moment. No mind, I am the self. But that is the experience. When we achieve Jivan Mukti, what happens? The first experience is no thought. Now we've all had the experience of no thought, between thoughts of, oh, there's a thought, or the next thought. But Jivan Mukti is pure experience of no mind. No thought. All day, all night, 24 hours a day. It is this slight intoxication that makes one rave and revel about, while deep drinking is dead to all excitements. One's sound and consummate understanding runs in one course toward its main reservoir of the Supreme. It becomes divested of its knowledge of the external things, and in the presence of the one and no other, it also loses its self-consciousness. No mind, I am the self, doesn't mean that I'm conscious of myself, because then I have formed a duality, conscious of myself. I am pure consciousness. I have lost this concept of self consciousness. When we have self-consciousness, we put a boundary on consciousness, don't we? And then here we are, back in illusion again. There is no experience of self-consciousness. There's only the experience of pure consciousness, Shiva. Perfected understanding finds the errors to which it is exposed by its sensation of the external things, and comes to know that birth and life and all acts and sights of the living state are as false as dreams. Perfected understanding. Perfected understanding is when one becomes the silent witness. The mind, being repressed from its natural flight, can have no doubt or thought of anything. The mind can have no thought. The mind without thought, that is Jivan Mukti. It is lost in itself. When the natural heat of fire or motion of the wind become extinct, they are annihilated of themselves. Without the suppression of mental operations, the mind must continue in its misconceptions, like that of mistaking a rope for a snake through ignorance. Suppression of mental operations. This takes us back to the statement of how the initial mistake of the weak intellect is dwelling on a thought. Dwelling on a thought is a mental operation. We have to stop dwelling on thoughts. We only dwell on thoughts as a sadhana, as a practice, a spiritual practice. The only purpose of contemplating a thought, thinking a thought, thinking a mantra, it has no value otherwise. And when we think a mantra, what do? We create a vibration inside our bubble of consciousness that breaks the walls of this bubble, that melts the walls of this bubble, that balances the karmic traces that are used to construct the wall of this bubble. It is not difficult to repress the action of the mind. It's not difficult at all, is it? Think about it. Now, if you try to repress the action of the mind, it's impossible. If I say to you, do not think about elephants, what's happening? You're thinking about elephants, aren't you? What you have to do is take a different perspective. That's not difficult to take another perspective. And we take the perspective of silent witness. So it's not difficult to repress the action of the mind and rouse our consciousness in order to heal our souls of the malady of their mistaken notion of the world. The Vasishtha is clearly stating, becoming identified with the silent witness, that is not difficult. And from our experience, we know it's not difficult. Now, maintaining that connection with the silent witness may take repeated intentions to be the silent witness. When we continue the intention and then knowing that I am the silent witness, and it becomes habitual, always that is our perspective. We've arrived, haven't we? Jivan Mukti. What takes us out of that? The noise of individual karmic traces. So as soon as we take the perspective of the silent witness and the mind stops, there is no thought, there is no mind, there's only pure being, then here comes the ruckus in some place outside of the silence of individual karmic tracing. We don't have to put our attention on that, but out of habit we do, because we think we are thinking. And we want to honor our existence. But that's just a big mistake. You're not thinking. You have no existence to honor. It is the ego, which is also an illusion, that you're identified with when you have these kinds of thoughts, when you have this kind of urge to dwell on a thought. It's just the ego trying to establish that it is real. It's not real. We don't pay attention to it. Ignore the ego. You ignore the ego just like you ignore a mirage that you may have glanced in the distance, and you know it's a mirage. You've seen many mirages. Oh, there's one. You don't just continue to stare at it, somehow wishing that it becomes a lake of water. You just simply ignore it. All you do is you shift your perspective slightly and the mirage disappears. And the same thing with thoughts that arise, trying to take you out of the silent witness. Ignore them. It's the fundamental technique of meditation. Ignore all thoughts. If you can succeed suppressing the desires of your restless mind at any time, you are sure to obtain your liberation, even instantly and without fail. And this does happen instantly. At some point, the mind stops thinking. And there's the urge to think again. You just resist that urge. No, I ignore that urge. This is another thought. I am pure being. I do not think. I am consciousness. Come back to that knowledge. That is just important knowledge and understanding that we can refer to when we reach this state of the silent witness and we feel ourselves pulled away from the silent witness by some disturbance. Disturbances always exist, but you do not exist. Therefore, disturbances are an illusion. Also, the comment comes, even instantly, yes. Also, Acharya Devata has some same duality, yes. You know, the Acharya Devata, very beautiful and interesting topic. When the Acharya Devata arises in our awareness in meditation, when we invite the Acharya Devata into our awareness, there is that quality of another. I am here, Acharya Devata is there. I am meditating. Acharya Devata is going to help me in this meditation by giving Shakti, energy of consciousness, Shakti. Consciousness is pure. Energy of consciousness is a quality of consciousness. Shakti is a quality of consciousness. And if we focus on that quality of consciousness, we find it has the ability to melt the illusion. That's the beauty of Shakti. It melts illusion. It is the fire that melts the ice. And when we melt the ice, what happens? It's no longer there, is it? It just becomes water. It just becomes consciousness. And then we see, the ice was just an illusion, something that arose from the water, but it was always just water. Everything that arises in the mind is just pure being expressing itself as a wave or a form. And so in the practice of meditation, what we're doing is we're setting up an ideal universe for ourselves, a playground. This universe is the playground of the Jiva. Pretty vast. There's an awful lot of stuff in here. The illusion is huge. It is distracting. It is attracting and challenging to ignore. So we close our eyes, we go deep into meditation. We find the silence, connecting with the silent witness. Then we have a little moment of being. And in that moment of being, we exercise, we allow consciousness to express itself as a mantra. So what we're doing is we're reducing, like a scientist, all the variables. We're having an experiment. The experiment is, who am I? Self-realization. So in order to realize this, who I am, we need to remove all the distracting elements. And as a scientist, when we create an experiment, we would like to limit the number of variables. Ideally, we only want one variable. We go to a lot of trouble. We create control groups, and they're just perfectly matched. We're doing a study on rats, for example. We choose 30 or 40 different rats, all from the same species and breed, and they just look identical. And we imagine inside them it's all identical in there. All their little organs are just exactly the same. Their little brains are the same. They were born on the same day. They're the same age. They were born perhaps in the same hour. And if we could really, really have an ideal control group of animals, they would all have been born at the same instant. And we scurried around the lab and scooped up all the little baby rats that were born at this particular moment. And then, we have a perfect control group, all identical. Only one variable. We can introduce one variable now into this group and see how it reacts. So that's what we're doing when we're meditating or creating a laboratory. And we establish ourselves in pure being as the silent witness, and then we introduce one variable, the mantra. And we experience how that variable interacts with consciousness. We created that mantra in our mind, didn't we? It's our creation. It's a part of us. And then we go to the next step. And we begin Sanyama, and we think a sutra. And at some point, we think a sutra that invokes the Acharya Devata. And there is the Acharya Devata. Now, from one perspective, this being does not exist. This being is illusion. But from another perspective, the being is definitely existing on the same level that we exist. So this process of meditation, this time we spend in meditation, is extraordinarily precious. It is the time of research and discovery on a very practical sense who we are, using our own built-in, very beautiful and perfect laboratory. If you're a scientist and you walk into your laboratory ready to conduct your experiments for the day, you're not lazy. You don't just go and sit in a chair and stare out the window and not do anything. You're busy, you're focused, you're very engaged and attentive about your task for the afternoon or the morning when you've arrived at your laboratory. That's how we approach our meditation. We don't just, okay, here we go again. And then we daydream for 55 minutes or whatever. And we say, oh, yes, I meditate. No, that's just a total waste of time. We always are totally engaged with every aspect of our experiment of self-realization. Learning how we can, without difficulty, repress the action of the mind and rouse our consciousness in order to heal our souls of the melody of their mistaken notion of the world. Beautiful statement. If you can succeed suppressing the desires of your restless mind at any time, you are sure to attain your liberation even instantly and without fail. And if you'll recall, that is part of the invocation of the Acharya Devata. This meditation could very likely be the meditation in which you achieve Jivan Mukti. That statement is actually made.